It's Antiwar Radio on Chaos 95.9 FM in Austin, Texas. It's fundraising week, and it's Armistice Day. So, good combination for those two things, I think, is to bring Lew Rockwell back on the show. You all know this guy. He's the founder and president of the Ludwig von Mises Institute at Mises.org, Mises.org, home of Austrian economics and all the best libertarian thinkers in our entire society. And he's the author of Speaking of Liberty, a great collection of speeches, and The Left, the Right, and the State. Of course, he's the proprietor of LewRockwell.com. Welcome back to the show, Lew. How are you doing?
Hey, Scott. Great to be with you.
Well, it's great to have you here. Happy Armistice Day to you.
Thank you very much, and I think it's good to remember that originally Armistice Day was established as I won't say as a celebration of peace, but as a remembrance that despite what has to be the worst disaster in the history of human civilization, that thing we call World War I, it did finally come to an end, and that was what Armistice Day celebrated, that all those years ago, finally the murdering stopped. But then the evil American Legion got, some decades later, lobbied the Congress to change it to Veterans Day in order to recognize them. And now we're at a point, I noticed in watching Morning Joe this morning, terrible thing that I watch MSNBC, the GE network, the Merchant of Death network. But I noticed they don't talk about veterans anymore, and this is really all across at least cable television. It's all about the serving troops. So Veterans Day has come to be the support the troops in all their various wars and occupations, wherever they're killing for the government, support them. And nobody, needless to say, don't pay attention to all the poor guys who are in that single payer hell called the Veterans Administration, hospitals and the inmates and all in their various facilities. Nobody talks about the kids who came back with no arms and no legs and part of their brain gone. And as we know, there's been a horrific toll. And of course, needless to say, nobody ever talks about the people they kill in foreign countries. They're just gooks; they don't count. But it's interesting to see, the change from Armistice Day to Veterans Day to Pro-War Day. I mean, day to support the troops in their various wars all over the world. And, of course, the government and its pals would like us to concentrate on the troops because they don't want us looking at why these various wars are fought. They don't want us remembering that Hamid Karzai, the president of Afghanistan, was a Chevron lobbyist. And the Chevron is the leading oil company in building this vast pipeline across Afghanistan that General McChrystal uses most of his troops to protect the building of the pipeline. And we're not supposed, of course, to know those kinds of things. We're not supposed to know why the government actually fights the rotten wars it does.
Well, why did this government fight World War I, Lew?
Well, I think that, sometimes I wonder, do they inflate to fight wars, or do they fight wars to inflate? Or maybe it's just, a combination of the two. But I think that they fought World War I to expand the government. I mean, so that it's if we can think of the oligarchy of government that runs us, that combination of big corporations and the big government that cooperate together against the rest of us, they did very well out of World War I. There were a lot of companies. General Electric, I mentioned General Electric. General Electric did very well out of World War I. Similar companies did very well. The banks did very well. The government itself massively grew. So you had all the various interest groups interested in it, and then you had a crazy man and an evil man elected as president on, by the way, a pro-peace platform. Woodrow Wilson ran on just like FDR would later do, that he was going to stay out of the war. And if you would elect him, there would be peace, and that American boys would not be sent to Europe to die. So, of course, the minute that Woodrow Wilson is elected, he begins to scheme for preparations for a war. And these wars don't just happen. There are all kinds of interest groups, obviously, operating in Europe too, as to why wars happen, why people profit from wars. And in the case of the American government, going to war to make sure that J.P. Morgan and Company and various investment banks didn't all begin with Goldman Sachs. You had their various predecessors in earlier regimes.
Well, he financed all the arms sales to the British, right?
Well, they wanted also to make sure that the British government didn't default on its debts to J.P. Morgan and Company.
Yeah.
Then, of course, there were vast armament sales. So, yeah, I mean, it's all the regular reasons. And Woodrow Wilson, in those days, they actually needed a little more proof of things, or at least phony proof. It wasn't just enough. The president wasn't quite the dictator he is today. So he schemed various things and pretended that the Germans had sunk an American passenger ship, and that was why we had to go to war against Germany. And what the U.S. did in doing that, it took a horrific war that was going on in Europe, but that was pretty much stalemated between the so-called Allies and the other side. How come the U.S. side is always the Allies? I don't know. It always isn't. Whereas the other side consists of the crumb bombs, or whatever the name is they give to them. But anyway, this war was at a stalemate, and when the U.S. went in on the side of the Allies, on the side of Britain and France and so forth, what they did was they enabled that side to totally crush the other side, and to abolish the German monarchy, get rid of the Kaiser, establish a democracy, and many other terrible things that went on. And it led to events that later brought the Nazis to power. The communists came to power during that war as a result of war aims. And World War II was, in a sense, the second part of World War I. These were really the same war with a pause in the middle, just like the 100 Years' War and the War of the Spanish Succession. Other wars historically had pauses in them. So did this World War, Part 1, Part 2. There was a pause. How many people were killed in those two wars? 70 million, 80 million? I don't think we really know. And more than 100 million killed by the communists. How many did the Nazis killed? Tens of millions. The Mount Himalaya of skulls, men, women, and babies, came about as a result of World War I and World War II, and vast increases in the size of the state all over the world, central banking every place, so that today we have governments that would have made our ancestors just agog. And you couldn't. We have, of course, a dictatorship. Obama's a dictator. Bush was a dictator. The American presidency is a dictatorship. Granted, an elected dictatorship, but still a dictatorship, where the government today, in this country and in other countries, claims the right to do anything to you, spy on you, kidnap you, torture you, kill you, send you to jail if you don't want to buy their so-called health insurance. We go down the list. I mean, I feel there's nothing that's beyond them. And this current world regime, now pushing for a world government, was born in World War I, and especially in Woodrow Wilson taking America into that war.